Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Spiritual Thought, Dante Stewart in conversation with Dr. Jacqui Lewis. We are so excited to hear from them in a few minutes. But before we begin, we just have a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over. Please feel free to connect with other readers in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your excitement for this event, and what you've been reading lately. We just ask that everyone please stay respectful. Random House has enabled auto-generated closed captions for this evening's event. To access the closed captions, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen. Please bear with us. These closed captions are auto-generated, so they may not be 100% accurate, but we will do our best. Random House will also be providing the link to each of the authors' books in the chat. We would like to give a big thank you to our independent bookstore partner, Acapella Books, based in Atlanta. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link providing you with a recording of this event, just in case you would like to rewatch. And now I'm thrilled to introduce Dante Stewart and Dr. Jacqui Lewis. Dante Stewart is a speaker and a writer whose work in the areas of race, religion, and politics has been featured on CNN and in the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Sojourners, The Witness, a Black Christian Collective, Comment, and elsewhere. He received his BA in sociology from Clemson University and is currently studying at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta. The Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis, author, activist, and public theologian, is the first female and first Black senior minister at Middle Collegiate Church, a multiracial, welcoming, and inclusive congregation in New York City, which dates back to 1628. A graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary, Dr. Lewis and her activism work have been featured by The Today Show, MSNBC, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post, among many others. She is the creator of the MSNBC online show Just Face and the PBS show Faith and Justice, in which she led important conversations about culture and current events. Her new podcast, Love Period, is produced by the Center for Action and Contemplation. Raised mostly in Chicago, she now lives with her husband in Manhattan. And with that, I will pass it on over to Dante and Jacqui.
What's up?
What
Dante?
up? Hey, hey, what's up? How you doing?
Oh my God. I am good today. I got on my stuff. I got my Afro girls.
Hey.
And I've been ingesting your book, which has been just such a balm in Gilead. You can write, Dante. Stu, you can write.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. That was my hope, for real. Like when people was like, what do you hope for your book? I was like, by the time people get to the end of the book, I wanted them to be like, yo, that brother can write really well. And that he's not just, somebody who's doing stuff on social media and things like that. But, I wanted them to like really appreciate the crafting, the structure, the plot, the care for the words and things like that. So thank you. That makes me so happy to hear. I appreciate it.
It is gorgeous. Now, should I call you Dante or should I call you Stu?
Either one.
No, seriously, pick one because it's your world.
Let's do Dante. We can do Dante. All right, call me Dante.
Okay, so Dante, you wanted people to appreciate the words, the way it was crafted, the way it was laid out, the plot, which is to say it's an epistle, it's scripture, it's literature. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, so like when I was writing the book, first of all, thank you for joining me in conversation.
So excited.
I want to say a word of thanks. So grateful for you. Just so love your ministry, so love what you're doing and what you embody and represent. So thank you. When I was writing my book, it really grew out of, my Baldwin studies, because like I'm doing my my thesis work on Baldwin right now. So much of my idea about my approach to like, utilizing the epistolatory form as a way of thinking, the essay form, the memoir form as a genre and a way of writing and a way of dreaming, it really grew out of me reading The Fire Next Time and rereading it and reading it over and over again and things like that. And so like, when I read The Fire Next Time for the first time, as I noted in the book through my boy Drew Hall, Inside of the White Church, when I first read that book, it shaped how I taught, it shaped how I led, it shaped how I thought about myself. and I realized that I could not write the same again. And so not only from a kind of the way I approach writing, as it relates to like content and things, but I wanted to have writing that was so visceral and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so that kind of genre, the epistolatory form, the letter to myself, the letter
Yes. Yeah.
to Black people, the letter to this country, the letter, even their spaces, the letter to my younger self, to my mom, to my daddy, to my grandma, to the Black folk in the rural South, to my wife, to the many people, to those who were murdered, to those who passed on.
Yeah.
I felt like the epistolatory form, the genre of letter, much like Baldwin, would allow me, to theorize on one hand, but it would allow me to be vulnerable and intimate. And I felt like, I kind of wanted to riff off what Baldwin was doing in his work, but also Kiese Layman.
Yeah.
The way he did the American memoir, it was kind of vain in the sense I was like, man, I want to write an American epistle. So he wrote the American memoir. Tayari Jones wrote an American marriage. I was like, all right, let me do it. Let me write an American epistle. And so, that was kind of why I went that way with the literature.
It's certainly not vain, it's ambitious, and it is absolutely intimate and beautiful writing and evocative writing and honest writing. Dante, if for you, yes, for me, James Baldwin, what I would say also Toni Morrison for me and Alice Walker for me, like I feel like I'm sitting writing and going, was this a Toni Morrison worthy sentence?
That's real.
Is this an Alice Walker worthy sentence, a phrase? Is it worthy of it? So you wrote this beautiful epistle. You are so vulnerable and honest with us about your journey. I was talking about you behind your back today because you're coming on our podcast and talking to my colleagues, the four, about your journey kind of from this Black church, holiness, Pentecostal, into the white church, Clemson, into the white church, back out again. Like you've had this contraction, expansion, labor pains, contractions. And I just wanted to ask, what took you to Clemson? Like what is it that made you brave going into that white space? And what did it give you any gifts? You write so honestly about how hard it was, but also did it give any gifts? Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's good. Oh yeah, 100%. I was actually really thinking about this. One of my boys, Sam, one of my friends who went to Clemson with me, I was doing my book lunch party and he was like, like, how do we deal with like guilt and shame, and particularly dealing with guilt and shame of being like young Black people from the Black rural South. And I'm like, that was an honest question because so often, there's this kind of inherent story that we receive. It's like, if you're Black and you're from the rural South, if you want to make it, if you want to be successful, then you got to go on these white college campuses. You got to go to these white businesses. You have to have proximity to whiteness in order for it to bring you some type of rewards, in order for it to bring you some type of access, in order for it to bring you some type of protection. And so I played football in high school. And when it came time, to start deciding about where I wanted to go, I wasn't thinking about let me go to HBCU. And where I grew up in South Carolina, between St. Matthews, between Swansea and Sandy Run, there's many HBCUs between Orangeburg, South Carolina, Denmark, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. And so often we receive the script like, in order for you to make it, like you got to either go to Clemson, South Carolina, Charleston Southern, or the likes. And so I chose to go to Clemson, not even necessarily because I was aware of the kind of racial logics, and things like that. It was like, for me, I wanted to play ball. I wanted to do, wanted to make it to the league. I wanted to do all of that. And in some sense, it's a reflection of many of the ways in which we learn from our parents and from our grandparents, like, you got to get away from home. So we don't necessarily we don't necessarily criticize and take into account the way that message of leaving home, of distance, from where we grew up, in order for us to make it, in order for us to make something of ourselves. We take that story for granted. And as I write about in my book, it's like, yo, there's a script that's already written, and we are just simply performers. We are people who walk into this script. We are people who embrace and embody this script. And oftentimes, once again, the script is whiteness is right, and wherever we came from is less than. And so I went off to Clemson. I ended up playing ball in Clemson, and the ways in which, was as if I can speak of a gateway or in some sense a onboarding into, whiteness and white evangelicalism was through sports. Many of us play ball, and the people who have closest proximity to us are not like Black church spaces or progressive religious spaces or, inclusive religious spaces. Oftentimes they're very much white, they're very much conservative, they're very much evangelical, and they're very much male dominated. And so we just want to play ball, and our family be like, yo, y'all need to make sure you go to church somewhere, make sure you get engaged spiritually and things like that. And we start going, as I did, to FCA, started reading the books that they would recommend, but start listening to pastors that they recommend. And, we never took into account what type of person these spaces wanted to make us. Mm-hmm. And then oftentimes, in general, we really don't take that into account. Every one of us exists in a social location. My background's in sociology.
Yes.
And all of us exist in a social location, and that social environment has a particular set of principles, values, have stories, have myths, have virtues, have what they norms, rewards and punishment. In order to form you into a certain type of person. My wife is in the military. When you go to basic training, they have the idea of who they want to make you once you leave. They have that idea. You have military doctrine, you have all of this. They have this idea of who you're going to become outside of basic training. When you go into churches, we got this, connection process of the person we want you to be, the things we want you to be involved in, the ways we want to help you. Even when you go into business, you have onboarding and things like that. And so I never really took into account the type of person that these spaces made me. And when I went all in, with it, I went all in. And as I write about, there was always a cost and there was always a price to pay. And I never really took into account seriously who was benefiting in the end. And the ones who benefited oftentimes, were white Christians and not me and my people.
I knew. And then you saw a death. Then you saw a murder.
Yeah.
In real time.
Yeah.
You wrote that you had such an eyewitness experience, like we all did. And but the way you wrote that, Dante, pulled me right. I was right there. I was not in your car. I was right there on the street. I was with you on the street. Can you just tell, because everybody hasn't read this amazing book yet, because it just came out. Can you tell how that murder shifted something in you?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Dr. Lewis, like when I was writing that section and those two the story of Alden Sterling and then Philando Castile, I went back and I played the videos on repeat and I watched them again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
I was reading this book by Dr. Courtney Baker called Humane Insight. And I was listening to her and KSA talk about, it's a book about the ways in which, like, the spectacle of Black death and what, not just simply, the kind of voyeurism, the addiction to Black death that our country so has, but, almost like Kevin Quashie in The Sovereignty of Quiet when he asks us to look again at Black protests, to see the ways in which Black people are alive and not just acted upon, but that we live and move and have our beings, that the white world don't just make us into something, but we make something of ourselves.
Right.
And so as I was reading this book and as I was writing, like, I am over and over again listening. I'm becoming a journalist in this moment.
Okay, yep.
The reason why I was able to write so viscerally about Alton and Philando is because, like, I looked at it again. I had to remind myself. I went back in my journal.
Yeah.
And during that moment, I was preaching, I was teaching, I was leading in a church in Augusta. And, you know, at this time, I was very much invested in that space. You know, I could call back the principles and the doctrines of the Reformation. You know, I could call back all these books by John Piper and John MacArthur. I can sound very reformed. I can give you doctrine and theology. I can give you history and things of that nature. You know, and in some sense, you know, I had escaped into the white Christian space, and I was performing a certain type of blackness that made white people comfortable, but that also in some sense allowed me to escape from being held accountable for the ways in which I had become someone who was weaponized.
Okay.
And then when I looked at Alton that night being murdered, you know, like, I was not a hero. I was not somebody that just was like, yo, I gotta change, I gotta change, I gotta change, I gotta change, I gotta change. I was confused more than anything. I was numb. And the thing is, I didn't leave automatically.
Yeah, right.
I still was teaching, I still was preaching, I still was doing all this stuff, but it was almost as if like catalytic moment after catalytic moment was making me realize that the place that I was in, the home that I left, and the home that I had ran from, and the home that I had made now among these Christians was not familiar. It was not feeling like home. Because when that happened, literally the next sermon series that they preached was not on what was going on in the country.
It was on marriage.
It was on marriage. Now, you know, I don't mind sermon series on marriage. I don't mind people talking about marriage. You know, I don't mind. Talk about marriage and singleness, help people in their relationships, give them Mike Tyre relationship goals, get them right and things like that. But when the world is burning, when people are hurting, you have to have some type of way to care for them and their embodied experience. And the thing that Alton woke me up from, and the thing that Philando woke me up from, was the reality that, like, the same ways in which their bodies were devalued and handled was the same ways in which I felt my body made invisible in these white communities. And I just could not preach and teach and think and do all these things the same way. I could not do it anymore. I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. I couldn't do it.
I understand that, Lev. I really do. And I really appreciate the ways that you got out of, I'm going to say out of bondage in stages, liberated yourself in stages, many catalytic moments to get out. In my book, I'm writing a little bit about, there's a chapter where I talk about increasing your tribe. And what would have been ideal is that the church, which is the church of Jesus Christ, you know, a poor, itinerant rabbi born in Nazareth in Galilee, which is Palestine, Jewish, right? Daddy is a handyman, brown, right? A refugee baby, a homeless baby. I'd be ideal if the church, not the Black church, not the Korean church, the church felt that the body of Philando and the body of Alton and the body of Dante and the body of Jacqui and Mike and Sandy Glenn, that those bodies belong to all of us, that the body belongs to all of us, and the brokenness of the body belongs to all of us. Therefore, there needs to be a mourning, right? A testimony, you know, something that says, look, the body has been hurt, the body has been killed. So I'm fascinated by that disconnect, like the disconnect where the white church, not all the white churches, but we're going to call it whiteness, right? Whiteness can somehow disconnect itself. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, without question.
From the body politic, the way white supremacy is woven into evangelical Christianity, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like it was so woven into the ways in which we named, saw, and acted within the world that, you know, so much of the theology and the tradition, you know, did not take seriously our embodied realities.
Right.
You know, and that's why I would say, like, for me, what saved me, yes, was James Baldwin and James Cone. But what really saved me was womanists and Black feminists.
Yes.
Because
yes.
womanists and Black feminists would say like, yo, like you can't just say, okay, we're about liberation and things like that, but we need to be about wholeness. Like,
Yes.
I don't want to just be simply free or equal with white men. I
Right.
want to be healed and whole inside our society.
Right.
So woven into the theology, woven into the ministry, woven into the preaching, woven into the type of books that they were reading is this invisibility of our Black lives and our Black experiences where they're not taken seriously.
Right.
And so this really, in some sense, was so much of my own liberation and what gave me so much courage. It's almost like Terrion Williamson, the Black feminist theorist, in her book, Scandalize My Name, where she was like, yo, like Black worlds, our world making is as much a starting point as any other place in the world that other people make worlds.
Right.
And I think, you know, that's why in some sense, I wanted to write my mama. I wanted to write my daddy. I wanted to write South Carolina. I wanted to write my grandma and my granddaddy and my cousins and all the people back home. I wanted to write us into this text because we needed to know that, like, the way they thought, their limited imaginations is not the final story.
That's right.
That's their story. White supremacy is not my story.
That's
At one time, it was my story. At one time, anti-Blackness was the way in which I lived and moved and had my being. But it created in me such a terrible, terrible person who did not know how to love myself, how to love other people, and love, in some sense, the broken parts of ourselves where we would not have to be perfect or in pain to be human and loved.
And you have Black women who help you get there. I mean, it's your wife, it's the woman in the church that goes, nothing for Black people. I mean, I do want to kind of shout out, you know, as a womanist myself, to this other space, Dante, that's like, womanists also would say the wholeness of our people is interconnected to the wholeness of all the people.
Oh, yeah.
And just like as a pastor in a multi-ethnic church, I was talking to Otis Moss today about, what is it like when you are the Black pastor of the multiracial church and the world is on fire with anti-racism in response to the crazy white supremacy? Like how, yeah, sure, I'm in charge. So yes, sure, my ethic and my theology guides our work. But also, I have to be honest to say, I have watched the transformation, the real genuine transformation of white people under my leadership. Like I'll playfully say I'm on the nice white people tour. I'm like, come on, white people, come on in, let's read this, let's read Dante's book, let's talk about your issues and let's fix it. But I wonder if you see now, Dante, having been, you know, in that space and out of that space and now down at Candler and another kind of space, and the way you've immersed yourself into, you know, those sort of texts of Baldwin and so many others. Do you have hope? Do you see evidence that, and I don't know if I do, but I'm asking you, you're sure, but do you see enough evidence that white evangelicals understand how screwed up they are, sorry y'all, and how they need to be redeemed? Do you see evidence of that?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I'm trying to make that an open-ended question, but
that's really a hard one to answer, if I'm being honest, because so much of my world is not in white evangelical spaces. So like when it was almost like when I left and was done, it was like the preface of W.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk, where he says, you know, I left the world of the white man. I left the world of the white man and entered into the veil. To talk about the deep spiritual recesses of a people. And for me, like, I don't know like how to answer that, because in some sense, like Ron Niebuhr in 1932 writes his joint that he says that the white man would not permit Black people to full equality unless they're forced to do so. And I think, and I think so often, you know, the ways in which white Christians have been socialized and discipled to protect the world that their children live in more than they want to dismantle the world that will harm our children,
Mm, yep.
because
Yes.
they've been so discipled into that protection of the world for
Yeah.
their children.
Yeah.
Wealth,
Yes.
education,
Right.
uh, uh, uh,
Housing patterns,
housing,
law,
everything.
the law,
Uh,
right? That's, yeah.
who counts and who does not.
Right.
I don't know, in some sense, if I see hope, or if it is even my place to speak of hope in a sense, regarding white Christians or white evangelicals, especially as I think about like Morrison and Baldwin and so much of the work, that they did in healing and liberating our Black lives and our Black stories. So much of what they did was for Black people to say, I see you, I want you inspired, I want you protected.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, reading Toni Morrison's The Sight of Memory, the
Mm,
lecture that she gave, and where she
yes.
talked about, she went through the story of the Black autobiography, and she talked about that the active imagination is bound up in memory, that us imagining and pondering the actual and imagining the possible is bound up in our ability to remember who we are and where we come from, not just simply what they did and what they made us. So like when Baldwin speaks to his nephew at the beginning of the letter in The Fire Next Time, which can be read as a prayer, he talks about what the white world made his brother and what they did, but then he flips it on his head. Even when he's talking about whiteness and white supremacy, he's not talking about it in ways to educate white people to be more moral and be better and to be more humane and to be more just. Baldwin is telling his nephew, this is who you are. This is the world that you live in. And
Yes.
here you were to be loved forever, to strengthen you against
Yes.
a loveless world. And if we had not love, then none of us would survive, but you must survive. And I think that the question for us is not necessarily, in some sense, how much hope do we have in white people's ability to understand, acknowledge their need for salvation?
Yeah.
But it's in the ability for us to be committed to a certain type of, as Alice Walker say, loving the folk.
Yes.
How can we love the folk? And even the folk who are white folk who
Right.
want to do better, how can we love the folk? Not necessarily, how can we teach others to be better? And this is kind of one of my kind of sticklers with so much of what people have shifted in the ideas of anti-racism. So much of anti-racism, away from its origination with Angela Davis, so much of anti-racism is like, how can we teach names, dates, and facts about Black people to white people in order for them to acknowledge that we're just
Exactly.
human?
Exactly. That's
The way
right.
that anti-racism was conceived in the mind of Angela Davis, in the mind of James Cone, in the mind of Katie Cannon, in the mind of so many Black women and men who have thought about, what does it mean to live in our flesh and to be alive and to be set free. So much as our ideas about anti-racism was the question, what can we do to make sure that Black lives are free, in love, embraced, and empowered? It's not really about, hey, how can those whom James Baldwin called gangsters, those who in some sense took the message of Jesus and conceived of a God who simply wanted control, who simply wanted, in some sense to only overtake people and harm them. How could people who conceive of a God that way be the hope of liberation for all of us? In some sense like that. And so for me, even like the way I wrote in my text, like even when I talked about whiteness and white supremacy, I tried to do it the ways in which Baldwin talked about it, in a sense of like, I want to strengthen you, us, like thinking about who is the you that he's talking about in this text. I
Right.
want to strengthen
Yeah.
you and us against a loveless world, not just simply, trying to have us figure out ways in which we can continue to turn the wheels and ask the same questions that people have had centuries to
Yeah.
answer. I was on an interview the other day and somebody asked me, they was like, what do you hope, white people can learn from your book? And I kind of gave this little smirk. I gave this little smirk and I said, what can I simply responded? what can white people learn from a book in 2021 that they didn't have centuries to learn in the first place? And for me, I hope they learn. I hope in some sense, because there's areas where I think white Christians can say, this is the reality of this story. This is what happened. This is what y'all do, and you can change. But for me, my thing is like, I want to see us healed and in love and free. And that's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. I really hear that. And I'm thinking about Toni Morrison and the conversations that people asked her in her writing, like, why are your books about Black people?
Yeah.
What? Because I'm Black and I can write about Black people. And she would go further as a Black woman to say, these ought to feel, I'm a little bit putting words in her mouth, but these stories ought to feel as universalist, as ubiquitous, as everybody-ness as the white story. I'm writing what I know for my people, to my people. And she wasn't worried about how the white audience would feel about it. And I think, Dante, that's what I hear you saying, is your audience isn't about converting white people. Your audience is about celebrating, loving, helping Black people celebrate their Blackness, the faith that is our faith, the love that is our love, the bodies that are our bodies, the reality that is our world. It's beautiful, it's amazing. And you're saying, let's shout in the fire about that. Right?
Yeah, let's shout. Yeah, let's shout about
Let's shout in the fire about that. I'm going to read you to you.
Oh, okay. All right.
Heck yeah. I love, I traffic in love.
Okay.
I'm talking about love all the time. There's two places, Dante, that I just thought were so absolutely beautiful. And you all buy this book. Don't be not buying the book. But just, Dante, when you talk about faith and love, these things just really ring out to me. So can I just say a little bit on page 122 and ask you what you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Faith is as normal and as powerful as choosing to keep on living in the face of white supremacist capitalist brutality, economic instability, political polarization, religious nationalism, and the ongoing struggle of the distance between faith, Jesus, and our lives in the present. What a powerful definition of faith. It's as normal as being honest with the world as it is. It's as normal as imagining the world as it can become. It's as normal as the disciples on the road to Emmaus losing so much, but having the courage to begin again. Talk about that. This is good scripture right here in this epistle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. One of when I was writing about faith, it really grew out of my studies of doing theological reading of James Baldwin. And so much of my question was, how can I expand the canon? How can I expand ways of thinking about faith and embodiment and life by taking Black worlds and Black life seriously and Black text seriously? So like, I didn't want to simply say, okay, there's the book of Jeremiah that's named after him. There's the book of Isaiah that's named after him. But I wanted to say, what is there for me when I read the book of Toni Morrison?
Yes.
Book of Toni Cade and Barbara. The book of James Baldwin, the book of Rita Dove, the book of Gwendolyn Brooks and Lucille Clifton, the book of so many brilliant thinkers like Audre Lorde and Amiri Baraka. What can I gain from there? And one of the things that I gained was like, I got to talk about faith differently. That does not simply reduce my life of faith to an argument to be won or a battle to be fought. Because so much of Christian faith that we have inherited out of the Protestant Reformation never really took seriously the question, what happens to the people in your faith community? What happens to the way they embody their faith when the heart of their faith is who they're against? What happens when their faith must always have an enemy? As Toni Morrison would talk about that what happens when you always have to put somebody down to feel like you matter?
Okay. Yeah.
And so when I started to write about faith, I didn't want to write about faith in this book as triumphal. I didn't want to write that like faith as an abstract principle. Like, I wanted faith to be as ordinary as trying to be alive and be free. Because like, when I read the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, I, much like biblical interpreters from the brilliant book, Voices of the Margin, reading the Bible in the Third World, as we're doing in my class right now, in my Global South Hermeneutics class. One of the things that much love to Dr. Dubé, Musa Dubé, who's a brilliant New Testament scholar. One of the things she's always asking us is what does it mean to read the biblical story as your story? As Rowan Williams writes in his book, Being Christian, that those in the Near East, they're like us. Yes. And what does it mean for us to believe, particularly, that Black life, that Black people, that Black worlds, much like the life of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and the life of Ruth, and the life of Naomi, are lives that reveal something about God's divine love in the world that we live in.
Absolutely, that's right.
And so for me, when I read the story of the brothers on the road to Emmaus, I'm like, yo, they witnessed a lynching.
Yes.
And how could we be mad at them for wanting to get as far away from that place as possible?
Right.
How could we be mad at people who do not want to once again be reminded of the estimation of Black life in this country? How could we be mad at people for leaving churches because they don't take our world or our lives or our death seriously?
Yep.
How could we be mad with them when they leave those places that are familiar and they walk on the roads that are lonely?
Yep.
And what would it mean for us to leave the spaces, the faith spaces that we have centered for so long and given authority, and allow people to walk on the road and tell us something about the move of God in their lives?
Amen.
What does it mean to be like beloved?
Yeah.
And say like baby Suggs, here in this place we flesh that weeps. What does it mean to weep? And so I wanted to write, like, I wanted to tell their story like our story. I wanted them to be weeping.
Right.
I wanted to like say, okay, what can I learn from people who Jesus show up to and then leave?
Right.
Like when the verdict comes, and now we're left with a verdict that is not a good verdict. Right. And now that hope that we quote unquote had is now gone. And so I wanted to write faith as normal and powerful and beautiful as putting one foot in front of the other, and trying to hold on to the places that give you meaning.
Raising your babies, making pound cake, going to work, changing some diapers, just get. And today, when I was talking to Otis Moss and Michael Ray Matthews and Lisa Sharon Harper, I'm going to put this in this conversation just for a second, Dante. When I hope whoever reads your book, and when the Black church reads your book, you who were honest about the way your mom, your dad, the culture taught you, go get near some whiteness and be okay. That stuff's in the Black church too.
Oh yes. Woo.
Right? So we know
there. Oh yeah, we need to go there.
We know it's in there, and it's in there, like unexamined sometimes. It's in there as patriarchy. It's in there as sexism. It's in there as homophobia and transphobia. It's in there as children can't be seen. It's in there as violence. It's in there in the way that we who are Black people who grew up in this white nation full of white supremacist ideology and fear and whatever, couldn't help but inhale, couldn't help but interject, couldn't help but be tainted by the whiteness. Gloria Anzaldúa, we understand, we taste it, we chew it, we breathe it, we walk through it, we shop in it, it's in here. So it's in Black church, and it's not 100%. Always liberative. I was on a research project this summer trying to ask folks about what was liberative about the Black church, what was redemptive about the Black church, and some of the queer people were like, it was not redemptive.
Oh, 100%.
Thank you for asking. So what do you hope the Black church will do with your epistle?
Oh yeah. Wow. Thank you. Brilliant question. And that's very perceptive reading too, because that when I was writing this book, memoir as a genre is incredibly hard to write. As you're writing your incredible book, that's woven with so much of your own story. There's parts of those stories where we have to be viscerally honest with ourselves. about the multitudes that we hold in ourselves, the multitudes that we come from, and things like that. And when I was writing this memoir, I was like, I cannot just write the story of Black church as triumphal.
Right.
Like too often times, like you said, like the Black church is not liberative for everybody. As I write about, even in that section, in that chapter womb, I learned what bodies were meant to be loved and what bodies were meant to be hated. That was before I ever stepped in the white church.
You learned we learned about good hair.
Yes.
And skin tone.
Yes.
And body size and straightness.
Yes.
We learned about maleness.
Yes. It was so woven into the ways we preached and the ways, and as they said back home, people were set down, and things like that. And so, like when I was writing this, I was like, yo, I cannot, as many Black evangelicals do, for I was one of them at one point in time. We tell the story of the Black church as if like the Black church has always been about social justice. The Black church has always been about equality and humanity and dignity. Well, it might be the case if you're a straight male, but oftentimes, as you noted, women and those in the LGBTQ community oftentimes do not exist in a liberating community, but they exist in a community where they are forced to experience loss.
Yeah.
And so what is my hope? As I'm a minister at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church, where Reverend Dr. Moss was the pastor before Dr. Goodman came in. What do I hope that many learn? Well, first and foremost, I hope they see something that's so familiar to them. I hope they see like my taking seriously our Black church life.
Yep.
But also, I hope that they realize that oftentimes the things that we hate in others, we can become ourselves. The things that we hate to see and that we run from, oftentimes, we are those who, reinforce those notions. We are those who re-traumatize people. We are those who oftentimes, can exist in the same type of ways that many of the white people who we came from or walk alongside, we exist in those same type of ideologies. And so for many of us,
right.
And in some sense, as a writer, what I wanted to do, and so many writers are doing, and the ways in which Baldwin did, I keep going back to The Fire Next Time, because right here on my mind, out of this essay by Douglas Field called Pentecostalism and All This Jazz. And Baldwin criticized white religion, for the ways in which white religion devalued and destroyed black lives and Black worlds. But he also criticized Black religion for the same ways they devalue and destroy Black humanity, where he has this line in The Fire Next Time where he says that oftentimes the passion with which we love the Lord was a measure of how much we distrusted ourselves and feared and hated ourselves. And I think if this book, as I was walking at church, so many people at church are I'm popping up on them and they're reading it. I'm so happy about that. And what I want for so many of them is for us to be free of this need, in some sense, to reduce our faith to triumphalism, but to tell an honest story and do whatever we must with as many Black people as we must and as many people as we can beyond our spaces. If we can do as June Jordan say, I am Black alive and looking back at you, then I think that my work, in some sense, would have found a home that I can celebrate. As Lucille Cliff saying, won't you come celebrate with me? That's what I want us all to be celebrating by the time we get done.
I love that. I know our people about to tell us we have to do some Q&A, but I want to share my heart with you for just a second to say that, as I think about the church, period, I really, really pray, hope one day that we'll actually do God is love. Those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them, and that's it. Like, God is love. Love is the only way, the truth, and the only life, right? Love. What's love got to do with it?
Hey, everything.
Everything. All the time, every day. And it does just want me to give you the kind of last word on that. What do you hope love can do?
Well, I keep going back to Black literature. You
Mhm.
know, I I I must say I just hope in some sense Baldwin says if love cannot open wide the gates, then no other power can.
Can no other power can. I
If
hoped
if
you
love
hope.
if love can't open the gates,
Yeah.
then no other power can. And I think that my hope, particularly of love, would that love would allow us first and foremost to look at ourselves and embrace ourselves and explore,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
explore what Elizabeth Alexander calls the Black interior,
Yeah.
complex Black selves,
Yeah.
real and enactable Black power, unfetishized Black beauty. I
Yeah.
love open the gates, as Toni Morrison eulogizes James Baldwin and says that he went into the forbidden places and
Mhm.
decolonized them so that we all can enter in.
Yeah.
So if love can open wide the gates, and if love can decolonize the forbidden places and
Yeah.
allow all of us to sing and to dance and to be free and to be in love and to be healed and to be whole in ways that will make right the ways in which we learn how to be terrible and
Yes.
harmful and ugly and messy. If love can do that work, and if my book, Shouting in the Fire, can be a part of that work of love, helping us become alive and free and whole, then as many of the saints back home would say, then my living will not be in
Not
vain.
be in vain. Amen, Dante. Oh, I'm so glad to talk to you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
We're going to do this again
Oh, yes, we have to.
really
We
soon.
got to talk about fierce love. You got to
We
let
got to
me
talk
return
about
the
fierce
favor.
love. We're going to talk about fierce love.
You got to let me return the favor.
Absolutely. Dante, thank you for this beautiful piece of work. It is an American epistle, and I
Indeed.
think it's got wisdom for all the people. Sometimes,
Indeed.
our binary is too only black and white, but all the people have a
Mhm.
word to find
Mhm.
in this vulnerable, beautiful text that calls us into ourselves. Thank you so much for this work. I'm making a transition there, y'all. Is that good?
We open it up for
The
some
time for
Q&A.
some Q&A?
Yeah.
Or Dante and I just keep on talking.
Okay. I guess we'll do it, Dr. Lewis.
Okay.
We could do
Yeah,
it.
just Jacqui. Please just call me Jacqui.
Okay,
Just,
Jackie.
just
All
Jacqui.
right,
Yeah.
Jackie. Okay, Jackie.
Yeah. So let me see. What are your thoughts? Jessica wants to know about predominantly Black churches connected to, therefore submitting to the leadership of greater white evangelical governing bodies. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so much of it is transactional, and whenever whenever what I can be and what I can become is transactional,
Mhm.
then it would always devalue, what I have to offer,
Yeah.
and it would always be in the context of what value can I bring to this larger dominating space. It'll always be existing in the empower dynamics that are not helpful.
Right,
And
right, right.
so, when I think about, Black churches, oftentimes inside of the SBC or, Black evangelicals in white spaces, there seems to always be this sort of type of Black performance that wants to authenticate itself. That wants to authenticate itself for white people. So it's like performing a certain type of Blackness that can be accepted, but also evade, the larger Black world, and distance itself from the larger Black world. So, it's performative, but it's also power dynamics. But I think it also can be problematic because at the end of the day, who's ever in power within any space will always make the decisions in some sense that's most beneficial to the
Yeah,
community, the
yeah,
demographic that they believe that they are serving and will carry on their legacy.
yeah.
So if this space hasn't been built for me, then
Right.
it won't in the long term benefit all of me and everybody that I bring. So I think there's so many, I think you can do it, and many people do it. That ain't my calling. The spirit of the Lord, then that spirit that left that house for me, that spirit is long gone for me, and I definitely ain't going back into that kind of dynamic. but I think it can be done because many people are doing it. It's just, I think there's too much, there's too much kind of like trepidation in a sense and not enough freedom. There's too much performance and not enough freedom. There's too much transaction and not enough freedom. And I think, as the Black sister said, I can't remember, I think she's a journalist. She says unity is good, but freedom is better.
Freedom is better. Freedom is better. And just to say, as Miss Black pastor in the multi-ethnic church, yeah, it's hard work. It's hard work. In my denomination, I mean, we're not connected to those people. They're just over there, UCC. But the only way you can really live in full covenant, would that be the right word to say, covenant and communion with people, is you got to have some power, your damn self. And you just have to have some power. If you don't have some power, I would say, to answer the question, you might want to get out. I don't know. Just might want to think about it. Let's get out. Let's see. That was great. Okay. I haven't read the full book yet. Jessica says she just started, but I'm wondering if you talk about how Blackness is not a monolith, and therefore neither is the Black church. For instance, there's the Baptist, AME, Episcopal, Pentecostal, Methodist, etc., also Presbyterian, also all kinds. But so how do you speak to those different experiences, Dante? She wants to know.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily speak to those experiences just because I'm not writing kind of that kind of theoretical text. You know, I'm writing memoir, and so if in some sense you feel, I don't tell you this is Baptist, this is Pentecostal, but you do feel, Pentecostalism. You feel, you feel different Black experiences in my text. You see me, like legit, like at the heart of this text is me as a
having different kinds of Black experiences.
Different kinds of Black experiences. Some, more healthy than others. You see people around me. There are characters, within my text, whether it's my wife, whether it's my mom and my daddy, whether it's, whether it's college campuses at Clemson, whether it's those of us in white churches, whether it's those when on the streets and, and students that I teach and things like that. You are introduced to these type of experiences. And if in some sense, how do I navigate those different experiences? I tell them, I try and do as best I can to write those characters, for that's who they are in my story. I try and write them as honest and human and complex as I possibly can. I'm not the hero of this story. Neither are my characters. I'm just the one who tells it. And I try and tell as human story as possible, given the different type of experiences that we all go through.
You do, Dante. And I think what's really beautiful about any memoir is the particularity, like the deep particularity of a story has ubiquitous, universal meanings, I think, right? Because you're not trying to, you're here telling the truth on yourself and beautifully telling about your characters. Let's see. If we could ever know, what would you imagine the ancestors would say about the fire that continues to burn?
Oh.
Hi, Emma.
Wow. That's a great question. What I think, I listen to those who are present, for they are always speaking.
Yeah.
What are the ancestors saying? I hear it in the language of Robert Jones and the Prophets. What are they saying? I hear it in Heavy by Kiese Lehman. I hear it in The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Phil. I hear it in Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down. I hear it in Darnell's Moore, No Ashes in the Fire, and Jasmine Ward's Men We Reap. I hear it in the songs of Tasha Cobb and Kiera Sheard. I hear it in the ways in which we dance, and you see memes and videos pop up on social media.
Oh my God, those little Black baby videos with their daddy.
Yes, that's the ancestors speaking. And what are they speaking? That simple message, what June Jordan write in Who Look at Me? I am Black alive and looking back at you.
That's right.
That's what the ancestors are saying.
I love that, Dante. Well, I'm going to indulge just one question about my book. My book is called Fierce Love, A Bold Path to Ferocious Courage.
Get that book. I've been reading it.
And middle people, you're going to be studying my book this year. This is for my people. You're going to read this book this year. We're having it in the classroom. We're doing Christmas with it. And on November 9th, I'll be talking about my book in this kind of forum. And Dante's going to come back and talk to me. So today, let us celebrate Dante with one more question. Thank you for asking, Ayana. What inspired you, Patricia wants to know, about Baldwin's life and work?
it probably was Baldwin's ability to be honest, but also never forget his Pentecostalism.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
like I needed ways during these moments
mm.
to like to not forget where I come from, but try and be the best that I can be, and in some sense expand my own identity.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think about like as Morgan had asked, about about her younger self, and describing the book to young black middle schooler. You know, I have a section in my book where I talk about teaching middle schoolers.
Mhm.
And one of my little homies, one of my little dudes, the ways in which like Juice World became like Jesus and good news to him.
Mm.
And like for me, it was James Baldwin, but for him, it was Juice World.
Yeah.
And it was almost like we all got to figure out a way to become the answers to the problems that we face.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of Octavia Butler in writing in Essence magazine called A Few Rules for Predicting the Future. A student had read the Parable series and was like, yo, is it as bad as you make it? And Octavia Butler simply responds, I didn't create the problems. I just looked at the problems that surround our lives, that beset our lives, and I allowed them to have 30 years to go into full-fledged disasters. And the student simply asked her, what then is the answer? It's that bad. What is the answer? And Octavia Butler simply says, there is no one answer. There are many answers, and you can become one if you want to and choose to be. And that is what Baldwin became to me, why I'm so inspired by Baldwin, and why I think so many of my young people that I write about was so inspired by Juice World and inspired by Kendrick Lamar, was
Mhm.
because they helped us become answers to the problems that we face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we, in some sense, found a way to become those answers little by little.
Yes. I have a chapter in my book about everyday acts of kindness and everyday acts of love.
Yeah.
Dante, I think your book is this kind of beautiful memoir calling us to the same thing. You are an answer to a question. You, your story, your blackness, your beautifulness, your power, your vulnerabilities, your fear, all that matters. If there is a message for all of us in your book, it is that faith is just waking up in the morning and living our lives, and our lives lived is a
Yeah.
testimony to what hope can be, what joy can be,
Oh
what
yeah.
justice can be, what
Oh yeah.
love can be.
Indeed.
I'm so glad you wrote this book, and I'm so glad you invited me to talk to you about it.
Yes,
So
this
much.
was beautiful. This
Thank
was
you so much. Who's going to come and say goodbye to everybody and tell them where they find the things? All the stuff is coming to you in an email tomorrow, we were told, and you'll have a chance to rewatch this recording, and you'll have a link to buy Dante's book and my book, and you'll have a chance to keep on following him in the social media. Be your best you, everybody. What's your final word, Dante?
well. My final word is go into victory the Lord provides. I will. We say at the end of every service, because I've been blessed, I'm going to be a blessing, and so whatever way we can do that, whatever, put your hands up. Our benediction, because I've been blessed, because I've been blessed, I'm going to be a blessing, and we say go in peace, and the victory that the Lord provides. So go in peace.
Go in peace,
Read
everybody.
my book, share it
Yep,
with
read the
somebody
book.
and enjoy it.
Dante, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Carla. Bye, Ayana. Okay.